And of course, the latest crisis that the government finds itself in has been precipitated by a vote that is to be done tomorrow in Geneva by the UN Human Rights Council on the alleged war crimes by Sri Lanka. What will India's stand at the UN be? A meeting headed by the Prime Minister is going to discuss that stand on the UN resolution calling for strictures on Sri Lanka. That meeting has now ended. The government is meeting on a board footing to decide the nature of amendments that it is likely to move on the US-sponsored resolution on the war crimes allegedly perpetrated by Sri Lankan armed forces on the Tamil civilian population. Top government officials will hold the next meeting soon, and that will be chaired by the External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid, the National Security Advisor, and the Foreign Secretary. The government is under pressure from the DMK to include the word genocide and press for an independent international probe into Lankan war crimes. The nature of the amendments that the government will finally push for, though, is not known yet. Headlines: today's External Affairs Ministry correspondent Maha Siddiqui now joins us on the phone line. Maha, have you got any details on the kind of amendments that the government is mulling?
Well, Padmaja, we were just able to speak to some of our sources in the government after the meeting ended, and what we understood was that the amendments are being worked upon at the moment. Now, what we understand is that at the meeting that was headed by the Prime Minister, this was a high-level meeting which included the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, the National Security Advisor, India's permanent representative at UN in Geneva, Dilip Sinha, as well as Salman Khurshid. That meeting ended, after which another meeting started, and that meeting has also ended. We understand that in the high-level meeting, an idea was given to the officials that what are the amendments that India would at this stage want to push, and now it is a matter of raising this amendment and the text really that is being mulled over. We have to understand, Padmaja, that it is quite a tricky situation for India as well, for simple reason that an amendment at this stage is like a double whammy for India on two ends. First of all, the sponsors of this resolution, the US, first have to be taken in the loop, and that itself could be problematic because this resolution has largely been West, and their point would be that they have carried on consultations with 47 countries over the last 45 days, and that if India had such a strong opinion on this issue, then maybe India should have had a resolution of its own. The second point being that at this stage, they have to first agree to an amendment. If they don't, then India will have to push for an amendment on its own while voting is on, and there are really slim chances that an amendment, if it is very harshly worded, would actually go through.
All right, Maha, thank you very much for joining us with that update. And the latest on the DMK center standoff, 3 of the 5 DMK ministers have tendered their resignation before the Prime Minister. It is believed that M. Argiri, Karunanidhi's elder son, who delayed his resignation, remains hesitant to cut off ties with the UPA.
We have handed over the resignation letter to the Honorable Prime Minister. 3 of the resignation has already been handed over. Another 2, Aragiri and Napoleon, will be extended to the Prime Minister shortly. If PMP is sorry, they are resigning, they will resign by
Meanwhile, putting up a brave front this morning, 3 Congress ministers got together reiterating that the government is politically stable. What also stood out was Kamal Nath's comment where he said that the UPA is not a lame duck government.
These consultations are still underway. As was said, that there is an opinion which is divided. It is important that whatever resolution, and if so we have a resolution, there is consensus, or at least good consensus in the House.
It was decided to formulate amendments to the draft resolution before the UNHRC. It was also decided to consult political parties on bringing a resolution to be adopted by Parliament. Even as the meeting was underway, the media reported that Sri Karunanidhi had announced that the DMK would withdraw its ministers from the government and would withdraw support to the UPA. He also stated that if Parliament adopted a resolution before the end of the current sittings, the DMK would reconsider its decision. We are not aware of the reasons why the DMK changed its position between the night of 18th March and the morning of 19th March.
Meanwhile, all eyes will be on both Mulayam Singh Yadav, who is already arm twisting the Congress over his oust Beni Prasad demand. At this point, the UPA is also latching on to BSP Supremo Mayawati's support to get some comfort.
India's position has always been and remains that the UNHRC should adopt a strong resolution that would send a resolute message to Sri Lanka and goad Sri Lanka to accept an independent and credible investigation. On the issue of a resolution to be adopted by Parliament, my colleague, the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs, Sri Kamal Nath, began consultations yesterday with the political parties. Opinion on the matter is divided. The consultations are continuing, and it may be possible to reach a conclusion.
Let's listen into External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid on what India's likely stand at Geneva could be.
I will depend on all-party meeting and the Speaker's direction, but I will hear that from Mr. Kamal Nath when he's ready. My job may be to move the resolution, but the decision has to be taken collectively. Once it's taken, then I will come into the picture.
So why are your parties being criticized on the fact that on anti-rape law, many of the MPs were not present in the House to vote for the?
No. I think that there were many things that were distracting a lot of MPs from different parties. And I think that we were fairly well represented. There were other parties who normally MPs from other parties who are normally more actively involved in what's happening. But I think so much people had got so exhausted deliberating on this for such a long time, arguing about it, pushing for changes, etc. Then finally the consensus that emerged, everyone assumed that now there is no problem, and I think that's the spirit in which whoever was able to come to the House voted, and we got it through.
The issue of Mr. Beni Verma's statement is over, you think? Because Samajwadi Party is not cited it, they're saying...
Why do you want to add more statements and make them an issue? So don't make my statement an issue. Let's just move forward.
Thank you.
All right, the External Affairs Minister not really making it clear what has been decided in that meeting that was chaired by the Prime Minister to decide what India's stand is going to be vis-a-vis the amendments that DMK has demanded that the country move to the US-sponsored resolution at the UNHRC. Maha Siddiqui was there. Let's get more details from her about what Salman Khurshid said. Maha, the External Affairs Minister did not really give away too much about what India is proposing to do, did he?
No, Padmaja, not at all. In fact, even in the corridors inside in Parliament, we tried to speak with him, and all he said was that the government is working upon things. In fact, what we understand at the moment is that the government is also looking, Padmaja, at the dynamics on how things will work at the level of the UN. How an amendment can be brought in, what are the chances that it will go through, how will India be looked at. It's not just a very clear-cut sort of a decision here that has to be made because of coalition politics. I mean, that of course is prompting this push that the government has now been really forced into, where they want to now look at an amendment which they earlier were not keen on. However, even after that decision is made that, okay, we will put amendments through, they have to look at the text, the wordings, and that has to be firmed up by this evening, because remember, India's permanent representative to UN at Geneva, Dilip Sinha, is in India. He was part of all these meetings. He has to then get back to Geneva for the voting on this resolution starts. So the deadline is really short for the government. At the moment, they are not willing to divulge any information, Padmaja, on what amendments they are looking at. What we know broadly, there are two demands of the DMK. One, the insertion.
In fact, Maha, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because Janata Party leader Subramaniam Swamy now joins us on the phone line. So how do you think India is going to be able to wriggle out of this situation, this tight spot it finds itself in now? There is the DMK's blackmail on one hand and the risk of alienating Sri Lanka on the other when the vote happens at the UNHRC tomorrow.
Well, I think the UNHRC technicalities will probably rescue the Indian government, because first of all, In order to be able to bring an amendment, it is incumbent on the mover of that amendment to show that that country has 24 or more votes out of the total of 47 to have a amendment brought on record. So India doesn't have, I think, more than one vote, namely itself. This American US draft, latest draft, is eminently acceptable to almost everybody. So there will be very few countries which out of those 47 will vote against the American resolution. And it's unlikely that the Indian resolution asking for very strident demands, making strident demands which the TMK wants, such as genocide, war tribunal, etc., will not be acceptable to anybody in the UNHRC. Moreover, the UNHRC resolution has no teeth, because the teeth is provided in the UN system by the UN Security Council. And UN Security Council, Russia and China have veto power, which they will exercise in favor of Sri Lanka. So therefore, it is just a sterile exercise. And I think the government probably would go and say that their amendments were disqualified on the grounds that it lacked.
But will that be enough to pacify Sri Lanka, Mr. Swamy? Because the argument will always be there that at least India made a gesture that seemed anti-Sri Lanka.
Yes, of course. The Sri Lankans will be very, very miffed at it, because if the Americans, who originally were the ones who were making these strident demands, have completely changed and taken a much more conciliatory negotiating position, and they have produced a draft which India ought to support, in my opinion. Earlier on, I was against. Last year, I was definitely against the American resolution. This year, I think it's an eminently suitable resolution, because the main focus of the Tamils in Sri Lanka, whom I met in very large numbers, is that they want devolution of power in the constitution. They want a say in certain local matters which can only come by devolution. At the moment, Sri Lanka has a rigidly unitary state. India also has a unitary constitution, but we have subsidiary federal principles like in independent states, etc.
Mr. Swamy, if you could just stay on with us for a minute. There is a reaction coming in from the External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid. I want to quickly play that out before coming back. Let's listen in.
And second, that they must prepare for elections.
नहीं, इसमें तो दो राय नहीं। मिड टर्म पोल का कोई प्रश्न नहीं उठता है। हम लोग अपना पूरा समय पूरा करेंगे और ये हमारी अपेक्षा है, ये हमारा प्रयास भी रहेगा, और ऐसा लोकतंत्र में होना भी चाहिए कि आप जितना समय आपको मिला है काम करने के लिए, उसको कोई उसमें कोई रुकावट पैदा करे, कोई बहुत अच्छी बात नहीं है। लेकिन एक साल बहुत समय नहीं होता है, एक साल कम ही समय होता है, और कभी 2 महीने 4 महीने पहले भी चुनाव हो जाते हैं। तो इसलिए पूरी तैयारी तो रखना है, और इसलिए उन्होंने आज सबको बुलाकर उनका उत्साहवर्धन किया, मार्गदर्शन दिया, और मैं समझता हूं कि जिस तरह का उनका काम करने का स्वभाव है कि वो हैंड्स ऑन करते हैं, उन्होंने ये चाहा कि सीधी बात हो, सीधी वार्ता हो, और फिर अगर किसी को कहीं कुछ ऐसा लगता है कि हम में संगठन में या किसी में कोई कमी है, तो उसको भी वो दूर करने का प्रयास करेंगे। ऐसे वातावरण में हम लोग की बात। No, I think that he has a very clear idea of how we have to work and move forward. I don't think that he was influenced by anything that was happening in terms of relationship between different partners in the UK alliance. But obviously that backdrop always remains. But I think that he was independently of that. I think he has a clear idea of the road ahead, and he wanted us to be alerted and to be guided to move at the right speed in the right direction.
So what is the progress on the amendments that you are preparing for UNHRC resolution, sir?
Lots of us are working on it. Let's see, when we make clear categorical progress, we will certainly share them with you. I will depend on all party meeting and the speaker's direction, but I will hear that from Mr. Kamal Nath when he's ready. My job may be to move the resolution, but the decision has to be taken collectively. Once it's taken, then I will come into the picture.
So why are your party being criticized on the fact that on anti-rape law, many of the MPs were not present in the House to vote for the
No, I think that there were many things that were distracting a lot of MPs from different parties, and I think that we were fairly well represented. There were other parties who normally MPs from other parties who are normally more actively involved in what's happening. But I think so much people have got so exhausted deliberating on this for such a long time, arguing about it, pushing for changes, etc. Then finally the consensus that emerged.
Let us go back to Mr. Subramaniam Swamy for a quick last reaction. Mr. Swamy, the UNHRC amendment is not only headache that India is dealing with, there's also the impending resolution that India is supposed to move in its parliament as demanded by the DMK. How do you see this reflecting in India's relations, foreign relations with its neighbors in the near future?
Well, I think the Sri Lankans are they have a clear understanding that this government is hopelessly weak when it comes to its allies on the question of Sri Lanka, and I think they are taking some long-run measures. I'm happy to see that the Sri Lankan High Commissioner went to Orissa recently, because the folklore is that the history is that the Sinhala people came from Orissa and Bihar and Bengal. So the Orissa government, the BJD government, has honored the High Commissioner. So I think what is going to happen is that Sri Lankans may think in terms of long run. India is a very important country just next door. So they may try to build more bridges with people outside the government-to-government format. And that's a right thing to do, because governments change. And the next election, there may be a new government. And certainly the NDA, whose resolution has not been formally adopted, but we find the important sections like the RSS and so on, who influence political parties like BJP and which even Janata Party as a constituent pays great attention to, have taken a very constructive stand on the Sri Lankan issue, saying we will not allow anything to divide the Tamils and the Sinhalese, which is precisely the opposite of what the DMK wants. And so I think I don't think there will be any effect on the Sri Lankan relations now after the shock of last time. Okay. Last time was a shock. Now this time they are more or less adjusted, and now they are also happy that some of us from India have played a role in the US modification of its resolution.
All right. India might just be saved by a technicality at the UNHRC. Mr. Subramaniam Swamy, of course, will be speaking to you tomorrow as well when that crucial vote takes place at 2:30 p.m. India time. For now, thank you very much. Joining us now is also political analyst V. Krishna Anant. Mr. Anant, what is your reading of what India's defense would be, how it could plan its strategy, not just in the UNHRC, but also in Parliament here, where it's supposed to move a resolution?
See, I mean, let me make it very clear at the outset that all this is actually sort of, is being played out without the basic ethical commitment to what human rights is all about. Now there is actually a huge amount of cynicism when the US is actually beginning to be bothered about the rights of the Tamils in Sri Lanka, a nation actually that has not had any concern for the human rights of the people in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere. So I mean, with this cynicism in the context, even insofar as India is concerned, and all this decision to move amendments, the procedure is very clear. The time for actually moving amendments to the resolution was over yesterday. So India as such has missed the bus, and has missed the bus in the same manner as India missed the bus in 2009 and even earlier. The whole point is when a set of people were being massacred in a country, it's one thing to take a position on whether Prabhakaran was a fighter or not, whether he was also somebody who was guilty of having killed the Tamil leaders and eliminated various other groups. That's one thing. But, it's also something that, a nation that was born and that was actually a moving spirit behind the Bandung Conference has actually shut its eyes to the massacre of an ethnic group, a language-speaking group in a country that is just in the neighborhood. I mean, in 1971, when something smaller than this was happening in Bangladesh, India played a role of being a liberator, and when it came to the Tamil-speaking people, it was reduced to. And finally, as for the DMK also was is guilty of this kind of a cynicism. The DMK was part of this alliance all this while it was actually contesting an election with Congress in 2009 when Prabhakaran was being killed.
All right, so as far as the political permutation combinations are concerned, a lot of cynicism about that. Let's get a final word in. Thank you very much, Mr. Krishna Anand, for joining us. A final word I would like to get in from Headlines Today's Strategic Affairs editor Gaurav Sawant. Gaurav, the wording of the amendment is going to be of paramount importance because India needs to make it clear that while it stands for human rights, it also does not want to be seen as interfering in a neighboring country's internal affairs.
Well, you're spot on there, and that is why this is an effort which is more aimed at domestic audience than aimed at what is happening either in Sri Lanka or in Geneva. What we're told is that after the personal intervention of the Congress Party President Sonia Gandhi, who wants to mend bridges with the DMK, India is moving a resolution, or India will move to get an independent, credible investigation conducted. That is what India's stance would be. There would be no mention of a word genocide. There would be no mention of a word of war crimes committed. So there will just be an independent investigation into what happened, and the focus would remain on lessons learned and reconciliation. So what's the way forward? How will devolution of power take place? So an independent investigation into what happened and what is the road ahead. That is what India's focus is expected to be. But in all this is not aimed at what the United States is doing or what's happening in Geneva. More of this is aimed at what is happening in Tamil Nadu.
They might be doing all of this only to appease a domestic ally, but will it not have any effect whatsoever on its relations with its neighbors, especially Sri Lanka, Gaurav?
Well, we've been speaking to a number of diplomats in Sri Lanka, and they are saying, one, as a nation, they're disappointed with the stand India is taking, because they're saying, remember, you have a situation in Jammu and Kashmir and you have a situation in the northeast where external forces could exploit the situation. While India is saying that there can be no parallels drawn into between what happened to LTTE and how India is dealing with the situation in both Jammu and Kashmir in the northeast. But should there be such a resolution moved in the United Nations Human Rights Council against India? Will India want Sri Lanka to vote against India? So they're just saying, just think about what you're doing. But as Subramanian Swamy was rightly pointing out, Sri Lanka is now engaging with other political parties also, because they realize that the government is extremely weak. They realize that this government is bending under pressure of the DMK, because India had clarified to Sri Lanka unofficially initially, saying that they're leaving it to Sri Lanka to deal with the United States on their own and come about with a resolution that will be acceptable both to the United States and to Sri Lanka. After having taken that stand, India suddenly, because DMK has withdrawn support, is moving a resolution. So that just goes on to show that this is domestic political compulsions which are weighing heavy on national interest and international relations.